Hey guys. So, a new article written by Paul Joseph Watson describes a social credit score system that big tech uses: Amazon, Google, Apple. And the Trump administration is considering using it to determine if you should be able to buy a gun. What do you guys think about that? Do you guys think that is a good thing or a bad thing? Let me know in the comments section. The article says, Trump administration considering social credit score system to determine who can buy a gun. Would partners with big tech to use spy data from Amazon, Google, and Apple. So as you see, there is a photo of Mr. Trump meeting with Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. Now, this is bizarre, man. This is a bizarre, strange picture in of itself, where the leaders of these giant monopolies are sitting at the same table as the President of the United States. This is scary. But it's a perfect painting. It's a perfect portrait of the climate that we live in, where giant companies are in of themselves kind of like de facto governments now. That's how big they are. So this picture says it all, and I hope you guys can see this. Let's continue to read. The Trump administration is considering launching a social credit score style system in coordination with big tech that would use spy data collected from Amazon, Google, and Apple devices to determine whether or not an individual can own a gun. That is scary. Now, I will say this. This is already happening in China. So the tech companies have the know-how to do this. They already have the systems in place. The question is, will Trump fight back or not? Will he accept this, or will he push back against this? Will he do what his voters want him to do, or will he take the bait by the people around him? That is the test. So let's continue on. The proposal is part of an initiative to create a Health Advanced Research Project Agency, HARPA. That just sounds creepy. Which would be located inside the Health and Human Services Department. Now this is interesting. So they want to start a new government agency when we are $25 trillion in debt, something like that. I don't know. There's a deficit of $3 to $4 trillion a year, or something like that. And yet they are proposing more spending, more agencies, more power, more control. Health Advanced Research Projects Agency. See, they're doing what the Nazis did in World War II. They're using health as a cover. Government is using health. When they killed Jewish people, when the Nazis killed millions of Jewish people, what they did was they used doctors. The Nazis were the first ones to use doctors as a cover to commit mass murder. So instead of the soldiers just shooting the Jews and burying them in a field somewhere, the Nazis organized and sent the Jewish people to camps where a doctor would determine if you were fit to work or you were immediately executed. And so the health aspect of government was first introduced by Nazi Germany. And the reason they did that was because they wanted control. It used to be that healthcare was not something the government was equipped to handle. It wasn't something the government knew much about. But the Nazis really were the first people to put a scientific spin on death, on mass murder. They used science. Joseph Mengele, very famous Nazi doctor who ran to Argentina or somewhere after the war. He died an old man, but he was one of several administrators of death. He would do research on Jewish prisoners, research on twins. He would do all sorts of just useless and pointless experiments because that's how he made his money. That's how he got government funding. What he would do and what so many others would do was create a crisis and ask for the government to fund whatever research project he needed at the time. And that's how they made their money. That's how scientists make their money, by the way. Scientists don't use the free market. They use funding, research, government programs. A lot of these scientists have never worked real jobs. They don't have customers. So they have to constantly create a crisis in order to get funding. And so that is what you're seeing on a mass scale, is government programs. And now there's a new one called HARPA, Health Advanced Research Projects Agency. That is just bizarre. Health Advanced Research. And so the government is partnering with tech companies and big tech companies who have massive amounts of data on everybody. Private companies who know more about their citizens than the government does. And so what do you know? They're partnering together, the government and these private massive companies who sole purpose on this planet is to make a profit. These companies don't care about the people they serve. They don't care about the people that they're collecting data on. They could care less. Their sole reason to exist is to make a profit. And they'll do that in whichever powerful way they can. Doesn't matter. As long as the governments allow them to do it, they will do it. Now, our framers of this Constitution never expected private companies to become so massive. And so nothing was written in the Constitution about what would happen if a private company became so powerful that they started destroying the world. That by having so much control and power that people would no longer be free. What would happen? What would be the contingency plan? What would the government do to companies who became that powerful? Well, nothing was written in the law about that because our framers, nothing was written in the Constitution about that because our framers just never expected it. They never expected these massive monopolies who had giant computers out in the middle of nowhere with tons of data on people never would expect that private companies would know more about its citizens than their own governments. And that's what we're living through today. It's like a bad science fiction novel, isn't it? You know, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Total Recall comes to mind. The Terminator comes to mind. The Matrix comes to mind with Keanu Reeves, doesn't it? 1984, George Orwell's 1984 comes to mind. So, it's a scary time we live in. Let's continue on. HARPA would employ breakthrough technologies with a high specificity and sensitivity for early diagnoses of neuropsychiatric violence. Let me read that again. HARPA would employ breakthrough technologies with high specificity and sensitivity for early diagnosis of neuropsychiatric violence, including Apple Watches, Amazon Echo, and Google Home. Let me ask you something. Why in the world would anybody want to buy this shit? Why does anybody want an Apple Watch? And let me ask you this. Why can't you just buy an Apple Watch without the data collection crap? Why can't you just buy an Amazon Echo and not have it collect your data? Why? Shouldn't there be some type of expected privacy when you buy this shit? Instead, the company wants more. Okay? It's not enough that you bought their Apple Watch, that you spent $700 on an Apple Watch, or $400. It's not enough that you spent hundreds of dollars on their products, but they're going to collect your data as well. And that's where their money is. That's what makes these the richest companies ever to exist. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me that these companies have been getting away with this, and nobody is up to par with it. And Trump has no idea about it. But I think young people are starting to get it. I think young people are starting to wake up and realize, hey, we're being taken advantage of. And it's weird because we're not being taken advantage of by the government, which is what everybody feared when they created the internet. We're being taken advantage of by some strange autocrat somewhere that's not duly elected, that nobody really knows who he is. We know the face, okay? We know the face. We know what the face looks like. So you'll get a guy like Tim Cook or the CEO of Google or Jeff Bezos or something. We know what their face looks like, but we really don't know who is behind the scenes, right? And it's really bizarre. It's strange that the data collection nowadays is not coming from the government. Isn't that strange? In that the actual customers of these products are people who wish to manipulate the people that use the products. It's a really bizarre system. In other words, Alex Jones is live breaking down the... Okay, never mind. Let me continue on here. I read the wrong thing. In other words, data collected from devices that spy on private conversations and closely monitor user behavior would be used to strip Americans of their fundamental rights. That is exactly what's going on. Except the government is light years behind. They're not up to par here. And it's scary because the government can actually benefit from the power these companies yield, and the government is easily manipulated. That is what's scary. And just imagine if Donald Trump wasn't in there. Imagine if you got a guy like, I don't know, Kamala Harris or Beto O'Rourke or Joe Biden. I mean, just imagine if you got a Democrat in there. They would not, what would they do? Would they stand up for the 99% of people out there who are getting their data stolen and they're being manipulated? Would the government stand up for the majority of people, or would they side with the few elites who are responsible for the insanity of our times, who are complicit, who profit from spying? You know, who would they stand up for? Who would Joe Biden stand up for? Who would Kamala Harris stand up for? That's a good question, because we're going to have to worry about that in the future. Trump will not be in there forever. Now listen, I am not a hardcore conservative. I am not a hardcore Republican. I'm not a Republican. I'm a libertarian. I tend to vote center right, but I have voted Democrat before. But I'll never vote Democrat again. And the reason is because the Democrats have gone way, way, way far left. Too far left for me. And I'll never vote for a Democrat again. Put it that way. After the financial crisis, after Obama started turning on the immigration debate, that's when I said, nope, no more. No more. Anyway, let's continue. Through the proposal is starting as a voluntary data collection scheme allegedly aimed at finding warning signs of mental illness. We all know so-called voluntary government programs often become mandatory at the drop of a hat, comments Chris Menahan. Let me read that again. In other words, data collected from devices that spy on private conversations and closely monitor user behavior would be used to strip Americans of their fundamental rights. Though the proposal is starting as a voluntary data collection scheme allegedly aimed at finding warning signs of mental illness, we all know so-called voluntary government programs often become mandatory at the drop of a hat. Yeah. So it starts off as a voluntary program, quickly becomes mandatory, and after so many years gets really hard to defund, gets really hard to cancel out. And the fact that the government of the United States and these private companies who appear on the surface to be tech companies, but deep down are something else entirely, are working together, that will destroy the society. That will destroy the society. And it will destroy the entire world, because these companies are global. You cannot have a society where there is a disparity, where there's that many people being lied to and manipulated, and expect the society to be happy, expect the society to be healthy, for children to be happy and healthy, to have healthy parents who love them. You cannot have a society work like that. It's common sense. I thought we learned this lesson long ago, but apparently we're going back there again. And there's very few people who are up to par here. There's a lot of people who have no idea why they're unhappy, have no idea why their life is just depressing. They don't understand the power that some people have. But I'm telling you, you cannot have global monopolies running rampant on countries and expect to have a good ending. If you want a good ending to the story, you have to have some type of balance. You have to have people who understand the depth of their own actions. You know, this guy Tim Cook, what a scumbag. This guy Tim Cook. Remember there was a Las Vegas convention, a tech convention a couple years back, and Apple got in there and claimed that they were the most responsible when it came to data collection. Remember Apple pretended, and Tim Cook was right there on the front lines, bragging about how Apple was so responsible with people's data, that they could be trusted, that their own the user information was encrypted and all this. And now, all of a sudden, he's meeting with the president to talk about gun control. This is bizarre. To talk about taking your rights away. To talk about the social credit score system. Let me ask you this. Why the hell would anybody, after reading this, why would anybody want to use Facebook? Why would anybody want to use Twitter? Why would anybody want to use Google? Why? Is it worth it? No. I'll go to a library. You have more privacy going to a library than you do using these systems. Why? Why would anybody want to use Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Snap? Why would anybody want to use these platforms after reading this? So, it's a scary world we live in. It's a dishonest world we live in, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. The only reason it happens is because good people say nothing. People in power do nothing. That really is the enemy of evil. Complacency is really the enemy of good and evil. Greed is the dire enemy of good and evil. And this is what this is. In a nutshell, it's greed. Companies are this massive. I mean, think about it. 4 companies basically run the entire internet. Now, the internet is a giant thing. The internet is a global entity. And yet, 4 companies basically run it. Out of 7 billion people on the planet, 4 companies basically run the entire internet. Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. Microsoft maybe a little bit, but not really. The internet, when it comes to the internet is basically owned by 4 companies. Now, why is that? The internet's a massive thing. There are 7 billion people in the world. Why? are there only 4 companies who basically run everything. It's a good question, right? So, and I want you guys to go to think about that for a second. Why can't we have an internet, a Silicon Valley, a tech culture that doesn't collect people's data? Why can't we have that? Why can't we be honest with our customers? Why can't we be honest with everybody and say, listen, buy our watch. What you see is what you get. We won't collect your data. You can spend and buy a product from us, and we are going to be honest with you. And not collect your data. And if we do collect your data, we're going to pay you to collect your data. You guys remember Nielsen ratings? Nielsen ratings? Well, what they do is they collect your data. They find out what you watch on television. And sometimes they pay you for it. Well, why aren't the tech companies doing this? How is it that they can get away with this? And the reason is because nobody in government gives a damn. Nobody in government cares. That's why. Nobody cares. So I think it's going to take a generation to really hone this problem in, because the boomers, the generation who are in power, they're not going to help us. And this really is imposing the kids. This is a generational problem. This is the older generation imposing their beliefs on the younger generation. This is old guys in suits who have worked and climbed the top of the corporate ladder and who are staying silent and spying and collecting data on younger people. And the younger people are really feeling the psychological effects of a society run rampant, of a society that's less functional than it ought to be, given the current technology. And my feeling is there's going to be a lot of angry people in the next 10 to 15, 20 years who grow up in a world that's really, really dark. And there's no reason it should be. There's no reason that we should live in a world that's dishonest to the point where you can't trust even logging onto a computer. There's no reason for that. The only reason I can think of for that is greed, money, profit. But you're destroying your own ability in which your profit, your wealth makes sense. After all, if there's no customers, what are you going to do for money? If there's no customers left, if there's no market to buy anything, your wealth no longer makes sense. Alright guys, that's all I got. I hope everybody has a great day. Like, comment, share. What do you guys think? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? The Trump administration considering a social credit score system to determine who can buy a gun. Now, listen, buying a gun is just the tip of the hat, okay? This can be determined for anything. Once you give the government power to determine who is good and who's bad, because that's essentially what's happening, is the government's going to decide who is good and who is bad, and that is different than what government used to be. Government's role was never to determine who was good and bad. That's something new. And a gun is just the tipping point. The social credit score system is a disaster. And it doesn't work in democratic countries. It doesn't even work in communist countries, but it sure as hell won't work in a republic like the United States. So, alright guys, that's all I got right now. Like, comment, share, tell me what you think. Do you think the social credit score system is good or bad? Why do you think it? How do you think it? Let me know. Thank you.